Number 1. So, when I was about 7 or 8, my brother and I shared a room and slept in bunk beds. One evening, I had a bedtime of about 8:30ish, so I'm in my room with the lights off and a little reading light on because I was doing school reading before bed. I know for a fact that my parents and brother were in the front of the house watching TV, and I was alone in the back where my room was. I was starting to read when I heard what sounded like a scratch at my door. Faint, but still enough to make me curious. So I sat still and listened. Again, a scratch. Faint, but a little harder this time. So I call out, "John? Dad? Mom?" No answer. Then a few minutes later, I heard it again, but this time it was absolutely my door and someone's nail. It sent chills down my spine. As I sat frozen in my bed, the scratching began to go from slow to drawn out, like 3 or 4 seconds long. It sounded like it was going from the top to the bottom of the doorway. If you could imagine the standard door with a 4-indent design, someone was scratching from the top row to the door handle level. It started every 5 seconds for a few seconds, and then it would suddenly stop. A few seconds later, I heard it again. When I fearfully called out to see if it was my parents or my brother fucking with me, I got no answer. But the freakish part was that right as I did that, the scratching immediately got quicker, louder, and aggressive. It got so loud that I don't understand how my family didn't hear it happening. Still, it continued until suddenly it stopped, and then I heard the door handle start to rattle, then turn slowly. I was laying under the reading light when everything popped off, but when the door handle moved and I got scared shitless, I ducked to the side of the bed where my pillows were and covered myself. I remember hearing movements in the room. Suddenly, something or someone pulled the covers where my feet were up as to reveal my face hiding where I would have been reading, but it was just my feet. So I screamed bloody murder for my parents, and like 15 seconds later they got in there and reassured me that no one was in there but us. The fucked up thing is, they think I was just asleep. They tell me that my brother was in the room with them the whole time and that they were watching a movie. They had it kind of loud so they wouldn't have heard any scratching or apparently me yelling for them. I slept in my mom's room for a week, I think. They tried every night to convince me that it was just a bad dream, but I know I was awake. I know I heard the scratches, I know I saw the door move, and I know I saw someone rip the blanket off me. They hit my foot when they did it. I don't talk about it with my family anymore because they just brush it off. But of all the paranormal or creepy things I've experienced, this one is the only one I can't logically explain at all. Number 2. This isn't creepy, but maybe unexplained. So I moved from China to the US when I was around 6 years old, and I had lived with my grandparents up until then. I remember struggling with the transition and missing my grandparents a lot. One day, I was taking a nap and I had a dream. I was sitting in my grandma's lap and she was slowly rocking me and telling me this is just a dream and that we should just enjoy it while it lasted. She and I were sitting across a giant road, and I remember knowing that right across the road was my sleeping body. I told her that I didn't want to go back, and that she could come back with me. We just needed to cross the road together. She said, "Okay, I'll walk you across," but as we almost reached the other side of the road, she let go of my hand and said, "You'll wake up soon." And I immediately woke up. My dad was there when I woke up, and he asked me if I knew what dream in English meant. As I barely knew English at the time, I had no idea, and he said that I was muttering, "This is a dream," in my sleep. He told me what it meant in Chinese and said something about subconsciously learning English words. I was just never able to forget it. I can still vividly remember that dream, and it was almost 20 years ago. Number 3. At the time, I was 16 and my friend was 14. We went for a mountain bike ride up a hill in some dense Australian forestry. We decided to make our way towards a fenced-off and on private property phone tower. After a 30-minute climb up the side of this mountain and crossing through several fences, we made our way to the base of the tower. We looked up at it, and it just looked like a bone-dry, hot-to-touch phone tower, a very tall one. It was a hot, sunny Australian day. Heat wave too. A little bit of wind kept us from sweating to death. We were a little hesitant to climb it. only because we didn't want to get heat stroke and because it had radiation signs everywhere. They were all over the ground and wrapped around the sign. A little shack next to it had radiation suits and PPE inside it. However, we just hopped the fence to get to the base of the tower. We left our backpacks and bikes by the fence we hopped over. We were just wearing our gloves, clothes, and shoes as we climbed the tower slowly, as we weren't wearing any protective clothing and didn't want to fall. However, as we started climbing, the wind started to pick up and we started getting cooler. We stopped on one of the lower platforms for a breather and gawked at the view. We both commented on how much cooler the wind was. We kept climbing, and as we got higher, we started getting actually cold, and some moisture started making its way down the tower. I looked up. It seemed like it started raining as my friend and I were starting to get really wet. My friend suggested that we just keep going. We didn't really care if we got wet. We finally made it to the top of the tower, and it was heavy raining on top of us. We were both shell-shocked at where the rain came from. We were in the middle of a drought, and it was clear skies before we climbed it. We thought we'd make our way back down quickly and get our stuff under cover, as we were both completely drenched and dripping wet. We started climbing back down, and my hands started slipping out of my MX gloves. Because we wanted to rush and I didn't want to risk my safety, I took them off and tossed them off the side of the tower, right next to my backpack. When we got to the bottom, we were still dripping wet, literally leaving trails of water. I took a step off the cement slab and dust came off my footprint. I turned to my friend, who had his hand on the base of the tower, looking at his wet handprint on it next to the dry metal. I hopped the fence first and went to my backpack. It was completely dry. Not a single drop of moisture on it. However, my gloves, which were 2 meters away, were soaked like me. We quickly got on our bikes and pedaled away from the tower, looking back to see if we could see any moisture on top, but nothing. To this day, I still have no idea what happened. It was literally like rain. The sky was foggy and everything when we were at the top. It was an active, shared Telstra Optus mobile tower. Number 4. When I was a kid, there was this hill in a field where my playmates and cousins and I played and ran around doing kid things, like using dried palm fronds as sleds, sliding down the side of that hill, or riding our bikes down that hill. However, I only did so on one side of the hill. The opposite slope had a steeper incline and would offer more fun and speed, but I seldom go down from there. Mainly because every time I went to that side, I felt like there were eyes looking at me and watching me. And the sensation and emotion I could feel from whatever was watching us was pure hate and malevolence. Evil. And as if some harm would come to me if I stayed there some time longer. Whenever I would slide or ride my bike down that particular side, I would recover as fast as possible so I can get away from the bottom of the hill. And when I did get some distance, the feeling of dread and fear would immediately go away, like some wave of relief washing it all off of me. Some years later, when I hit puberty, and as a young teenager, when my friends and I would walk around that hill, the feeling is still there, and I make it a point that we leave quickly, or I would walk faster than the rest of them. When I grew up, finally into young adulthood, I learned from the village elders and the local albulario, or the medicine man, that some elementals or spirits made that slope of the hill their home, and those spirits did not take kindly to noise and being disturbed. One albulario even mentioned